So, in case you missed it, things could be better right now.
Do as I say, obey, and stay in here.
Stay at home.
Genuinely though, I really hope you're keeping yourself safe as well as other people. Basic things are going to matter now more than ever, things like compassion, kindness, and taking down capitalism, a sympathetic ear, empathy. What? So I've been working on a video about euphoria for the past very long time, and that was due to be my next video until Manic Pixie Dream Girls exist. At least the traits that most typically define them do. We're called neurodivergent women. We just don't exist to make boring cis men happy. Manic Pixie Dream Girl is a term coined by film critic Nathan Rabin in response to the film Elizabethtown, specifically criticism about Kirsten Dunst's character Claire. Rabin wrote, "The Manic Pixie Dream Girl exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures." It's a specific kind of bad writing that hones in on quirky female characters that are usually white, thin, cis, straight and able-bodied by the way, though not always, who appear to have no goals or dreams of their own outside of making the bland male protagonist happy. She is a flat, dimensionless character with no agency and therefore is not really a person in her own right, but an invention to motivate male protagonists to grow. To see the trope played to its fullest effect, the best example I can think of, according to the words and intent of Nathan Rabin, would be the film Ruby Sparks, starring Paul Dano and Zoe Kazan. Spoiler alert, by the way. It stars Dano as Calvin, a frustrated writer who is tasked by his therapist to write a character that likes his dog. He dreams of a woman and writes about her, falling in love with this character he's created. He eventually writes that this character, Ruby Sparks, falls in love with him. Calvin goes to sleep and wakes up the next morning to find that Ruby has been made real. Calvin is happy until Ruby starts to show agency for herself, enjoying being around other people in a way which he doesn't because he's introverted. He begins modifying and changing her to suit his needs, and as time goes on they become more and more unhappy, and eventually it leads to this huge argument where he finally admits that he can make her do anything because she is just a product of his imagination, leading to a scene that I still find quite disturbing to watch, where he demonstrates the level of control he has over her and how powerless she is to do anything because her only purpose in life is to make him happy as he writes it. It's a really interesting film and my summary grossly oversimplifies it, so if you hadn't had a chance to see it yet, I would still really recommend watching it. Since its inception, there have been many female characters that have been labelled a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but the term historically has gotten misused a lot. Don't get me wrong, there are parts of calling out this trope that are definitely legitimate. It's nothing new that male writers don't give the same level of nuance and complexity to their female love interests as they do their male protagonists. Criticising a piece of media or text for not fleshing out the love interest enough and having the sexist subtext that a woman only exists for the pleasure of a man is good, fine, healthy criticism. We love that. But that's not how it's been used. Nathan Rabin eventually apologised in a lengthy statement for coining the term, saying, "The archetype of the free-spirited life lover who cheers up a male sad sack had existed in the culture for ages, but by giving an idea a name and a fuzzy definition, you apparently also give it power, and in my case, the power spun out of control. And at this point in my life, I honestly hate the term too. I feel deeply weird, if not downright ashamed, at having created a cliche that has been trotted out again and again in an infinite internet feedback loop. So, I'd like to take this opportunity to apologise to pop culture. I'm sorry for creating this unstoppable monster. Let's all try to write better, more nuanced and multidimensional female characters. Women with rich inner lives and complicated emotions and total autonomy, who might strum ukuleles or dance in the rain even when there are no men to marvel at their free-spiritedness. But in the meantime, Manic Pixies, it's time to put you to rest." So essentially, the trope has become so overused that female characters with even remotely quirky traits are often dismissed and diminished even when they're actually quite complex. Or, as Clementine, someone who is also often incorrectly labelled a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, puts it,
"Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. But I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours."
remember that speech really well.
I had you pegged, didn't I?
I still thought you were going to save my life, even after that.
I know.
Yeah, I think this goes to show that as far as film criticism is concerned, it's not really very useful anymore given the confusion around its usage. That the TV Tropes website has the nerve to use a still of Audrey Hepburn from Roman Holiday as the header photo for this article. I will not have you sully Roman Holiday's good name, TV Tropes.
Especially since it's arguable by the end of the movie it is him that inspired her to live a better life and introduce adventure into her life. Did you even watch the movie?
But the usage and nuances of crying Manic Pixie Dream Girl and the legitimacy of said cries isn't really what I wanted to make this video about. Or rather, it's about more than that.
Hi there.
I like to listen to songs in my head. I paid the cab driver in buttons.
When did you first suspect you were dating a Manic Pixie Dream Girl?
She can't feed herself. She can't pay bills. She just wonders at the marvel of every moment.
We have excellent security. Oh, for the love of... Out!
Okay, I'm writing a play right now, and I'm in the middle of the first act, and she's my muse.
This is real pixie dust.
Even this marker.
From the wings of a pixie.
The best place to see the night sky is laying in the middle of the street. It's the flattest place there is.
She does seem happy.
Happy as she can be. Yes, it's okay. Go ahead. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl condition is still only dimly understood. Although my own theory is severe retardation of the brain. If I don't go out there, they drown.
So this tweet, it seems, isn't the first to clock that many of the traits typically associated with the Manic Pixie Dream Girl also align with people who are neurodiverse. What's notable to me in this sketch is although there is a brief nod to the worst thing about the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope, which is the boring men that rob these characters of any depth, for the most part the biggest part of the criticism is actually how the women are presenting. And when we break these things down, what is it about these women that is considered worthy of being laughed at according to Cracked? Their overactive imaginations and inability to emotionally regulate themselves, their inability to focus, their disregard for social norms and conventions, and preoccupation with sensory tactile activities. These are all traits of autistic women, and unfortunately a huge part of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl criticism is often a criticism of these specific traits. The original definition by Nathan Rabin has a second part to it that I've never seen anyone discuss within this context. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl is an all-or-nothing proposition. Audiences either want to marry her instantly, despite the Manic Pixie Dream Girl being, a fictional character, or they want to commit grievous bodily harm against them and their immediate family. As for me, well, let's just say I'm not going to propose to don't psychotically chip a waitress in the sky anytime soon. Now, obviously, Rabin was joking, but what is the joke? That because of Claire's difficulty emotionally regulating herself and her difficulties reading social cues that he wants to hurt her? Even in Rabin's follow-up article in which he apologises for creating the term, he says, I remember watching Elizabethtown and being distracted by the preposterousness of its heroine, Claire. Dunt's psychotically bubbly stewardess seemed to belong in some magical otherworldly realm, hence the pixie. Offering up her phone number to strangers and drawing whimsical maps to help her man find his way, Claire was an unusually pure example of a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, a fancifully, if thinly conceived flibbertigibbet, who has no reason to exist except to cheer up one miserable guy. Although it's worth noting that the thing he finds the most unbelievable about this is the fact that this woman exists only to cheer up this one miserable guy, I can't help but be distracted by the way these characters are described over and over again. The way her traits are being listed as completely unfathomable or belonging in some magical otherworldly realm. Well, I'm here to say it's fathomable. I'm fathoming it right now. I fathom. Because I have been that girl. I am that girl. I am an autistic girl, woman. Girl, woman. Those things that you don't think exist, I'm right here. And I wasn't seen for a really long time. That's why it took me until my late 20s to get a diagnosis. The fact that when discussing this trope, the only time this angle has ever been considered, as far as I can tell, it's been played for laughs, usually with an ableist joke. It speaks for the wider societal issues for autistic women that this tweet gets at too. Because we don't just look at women through the male gaze, we look at autism that way too. The fact that it's predominantly men who are shown to be neurodivergent, focusing on autism in particular, isn't a coincidence. Women are up to 3 times less likely to be diagnosed than boys, resulting in countless women attempting to cope with a world designed entirely for neurotypicals. This is important when you know autistic people are up to 63% more likely to experience bullying, only 32% of autistic people are in paid work, and only 16% of autistic people have a full-time job. Research is also showing that there is a much higher prevalence of autism in homeless people, and that autistic people are at far greater risk of becoming addicts than neurotypical people. Getting that diagnosis can mean the difference between understanding how to survive in this world and not surviving. And if you're not trained to look for those signs, then so many people are going to be leading needlessly harder lives. And that pain is real when you consider that autistic people are much more likely to attempt suicide. And supposedly autistic women are at risk of doing this at a much higher rate too. And that's before getting into abuse statistics. If you understand women in general are statistically more likely to be abused at a higher rate compared to men, and the same goes for neurotypical people compared to neurodiverse people, when those two things intersect, the likelihood of abuse also goes up. Which is why that line in Raven's original review for Elizabethtown about wanting to cause Kirsten Dunst's character grievous bodily harm, I understand that it was intended as a joke, but I can't laugh, because I know that happens. The fact that there are so many of these characters who aren't taken seriously and are just assumed to be annoying or too intense, it speaks to a certain sexism that most women will face whilst also being ableist by erasing neurodiverse women entirely. When we talk about these characters, we're not just talking about women that have been poorly written to further the stories of men. Typically we're talking about neurodivergent women who are poorly written to further the stories of men. And it's incredibly telling to me that in all the criticism, the sidelining of these wonderful female characters becomes secondary to the primary criticism, which is that they appear too childlike to function in our society, or take too much pleasure from their fixed interests, or know too many random facts to be considered real. When I say that the traits of a Manic Pixie Dream Girl are described as too otherworldly to actually be real, that's how a lot of autistic women grow up to feel too, like aliens. And it fucking sucks. Now, there's other things I could talk about. I could talk about the fact that correlating people who present as neurodiverse with fantasy beings isn't really the coolest thing to do because of a history of being dehumanized and as not being taken seriously when we do talk about our emotions and our experiences. I could talk about how these traits are often fetishized and diluted to be made to seem attractive without having to look at any of the harder points of what it means to live with these traits.
I think we corrupted this innocent girl enough for one afternoon.
I'm not innocent.
Yes, you are, all right? And that's what I like about you.
I could talk about that Cracked sketch and how if it was aiming its jokes at where the criticism was really valid instead of punching down, it would look way less like what they made and more like the Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode where Jake is in solitary confinement.
I'm not afraid to be alone with my thoughts. My thoughts are awesome. Die Hard 6 on a cruise ship, pizza bagel restaurant, my father never loved me and I'm gonna die alone. Oh boy, that happened fast. Gar. Oh. Amy, when did you get here? You've come for my conjugal capabilities. You're looking real good, girl. Whoop, lost a boobie. No matter, I'll just build another one.
But instead of deconstructing a 7-year-old comedy sketch on YouTube, let's be proactive. How can we improve the situation? What solutions are there to this issue? So for me, going forward, there are a few ways that you could resolve this issue. One is, if you do receive feedback that you have written a character that's kind of veering Manic Pixie Dream Girlish, then just call her what she is. Congratulations, you have written a neurodivergent love interest, and that's great. But go the extra mile. Let her talk about her special interests and say they are special interests. Let her talk about issues with sensory processing and trying to navigate a neurotypical world. And also show her struggles and dreams outside of your protagonist. Has she been officially diagnosed, or is she self-ID'd? Has she grown up with a family wealthy enough to provide the financial support she may have needed? How has people's perceptions of her neurodivergence impacted her, and how does it impact her relationship with the protagonist? I mean, if you really want to break the mold, do all these things and make her anything other than a white, slim, brunette, cis, straight, able-bodied girl. I want to see neurodivergent women of colour. I want to see neurodivergent trans and non-binary people. Neurodivergent love interests with multiple disabilities. All these things. Even more points if they get to be happy in these stories and their neurodivergence or anything that differentiates them from the norm isn't used as something to overcome or as some kind of tragedy. My next point would be to support creators who are neurodivergent. And again, even better if it's neurodivergent voices that aren't white, cis, straight, able-bodied women. Here are some of my favourite autistic creators that are making content, whether that be well thought out, articulate, moving YouTube videos, or impactful Twitter threads that challenge your preconceptions of autism, or TikToks that give great summaries into what it's like to be autistic. Go follow. Do the thing. Finally, my last point would be write these stories and allow neurodivergent people to be the leads and point of view characters in these narratives. I think one of the best and kind of overlooked through this context examples of this is Amelie. I love Amelie. She fixates on small details in her own life and the lives of people she cares about. She clearly sees the world differently to the people around her. She feels things very intensely and sometimes really struggles to express herself. Have you ever seen a more literal depiction of a meltdown? She has sensory stims, spends lots of time on her own by choice, finds comfort in certain colours, appears to dress more for comfort than style, although she is obviously very stylish too, often retreats into an imaginary world to cope. She has a vivid, complex internal world. I think she's a great inversion of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl when you consider what the original definition is, someone who exists purely to further the dreams and happiness of the male protagonist. Amelie spends a great deal of her story focusing on ways to make the people around her happy, nearly at the exclusion of her own happiness. When it's pointed out to her that she's focusing too much on trying to make the people around her happy without working on it for herself, she goes after what she wants, or rather who she wants. Amelie already had a vibrant, fulfilling life with friends and family and purpose when she meets Nino. She just realises after seeing him also engage in quirky behaviour that they clearly have a connection and that to pursue that would make her happy too, which is really sweet. I love this pairing. In light of making this video, I actually revisited Elizabethtown just to see what I thought, and honestly, it's really not that bad. That's not to say it's good, but in my opinion the reviews are pretty unnecessarily harsh. There's actually a couple of things that I liked about this movie, and one of them is Claire. Whenever her character is around, the film instantly becomes more interesting, and Kirsten Dunst does a good job. And I've found that especially since watching it through the perspective that her character is actually neurodivergent.
You really failed. You failed, you failed, you failed. You failed. You failed. You failed, you failed, you failed. You failed, you failed, you failed, you failed, you...
It makes her character far less of a thinly conceived Felicity Gibbet and more a thinly conceived neurodivergent woman who over-empathizes with this man she meets once and forms an unlikely connection with. Is it still thinly conceived? Sure, but that's more to do with Cameron Crowe not fleshing her out more, not because she is, as Rabin puts it, a psychotically bubbly stewardess that seems to belong to some magical otherworldly realm. So, in summary, this tweet hit home. It's good to acknowledge that these characters aren't created in a void and can potentially reflect sexist and ableist attitudes in society. More research needs to be done on autistic women so more people can get a diagnosis. then we can start to see ourselves reflected in the media too. Neurodivergent women are a wonderful, diverse, underrepresented group of women who deserve to be loved and respected in our own right. We don't exist to make men happy and further their goals and dreams because we have our own. We need more stories that focus on these women and centers them as opposed to watching them through the gaze of these men. And if anyone tries to undermine any of these incredible characters by calling them Manic Pixie Dream Girls without fully understanding what the trope actually is,
looking at you, TV tropes,
or dismisses any female characters outright just because they do fall under that trope without considering that maybe they're neurodivergent, I would only have one thing to say to those people.
Suck it, Mr. Krabs.
Neurodivergent women
they have minds and they have souls as well as just hearts, and they've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty.